Okay, and these, the Jacksons? Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions throughout the state. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today we're fortunate to have as our guests Roz Kreizenbeck and Max Metz Jr., both from Historic Newton. This is the second of a two-part series we've been doing, highlighting the wide range of wonderful programming offered by Historic Newton. Earlier, Roz and Max informed us about the engaging series of school and youth group programs, and they're back today to share the outstanding selection of adult group programs with us. Let's start by meeting Roz and Max and then hearing about the adult programming. Welcome back again.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time to be here and informing another level of participant of what Historic Newton has to offer. And I have to say right from the start, I learned so much. I was a little aware of school programs, but when I saw what you have available for adults, I was really pleased and look forward to taking advantage of some things. And as a way to sort of step back and then jump in, could you just briefly share a little bit about each of your backgrounds again, and then hear a little bit about Historic Newton, and then we'll hear about the programming. So, Roz?
Absolutely. So I work at Historic Newton as the education coordinator. Came there about 1.5 years ago from Harvard's Peabody Museum. Before that, I was at the George Washington University studying museum education. So backgrounds in history as well as museums. So really fabulous place to work.
Yeah, what a great connection. Mm-hmm. And Max?
So I'm the manager of the Durant Kenrick House and Grounds, as well as I'm an educator there through Historic Newton. I am also, my background is in non-traditional education and outdoor education.
Wonderful. And Roz, just a quick word about the overview mission of Historic Newton.
Yeah, absolutely. So Historic Newton is a combination of 3 different museums and sites. We have the Durant Kenrick House and Grounds on Waverly Avenue, the Jackson Homestead and Museum on Washington Street, and we also manage programming at the city's 3 historic burying grounds. And our mission is to really bring to life stories of Newton's history within the context of American history.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump right in then and talk about the rich array of adult programming. Could you just sort of set the sort of background for the adult programming, please?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're really excited that we've recently expanded our adult program offerings. We now offer 8 programs in total for different adult group audiences, which is really exciting for us. And we really reach a huge diversity of groups. We have book club groups come and visit us, different adult social groups. The Dedham Retired Men's Club is one who's come and visited us a few times. We work at the Newton Senior Center quite frequently. We did programs with the Junior League from Boston at the Allen House last summer, as well as we go out to adult living centers, such as the Cambridge homes, and we can bring programs to them. So we really have a lot of flexibility and reach a lot of different kinds of adult groups.
Mm-hmm. You know, when we spoke of the school and youth groups earlier in the previous program, mentioned the vital role that artifacts and items played in those experiences. What's it like planning programming for adults?
Yeah, it's very different, but we try to kind of take the same approach, even though the audience's age is very
Yeah.
different. And we really, as we talked about with school groups, really try to create those entry points for everybody. So whether you're looking for a very interactive experience where there's a lot of discussion and maybe you are reacting to artifacts to create your own work, or whether you're just interested in learning more and kind of want to sit and have artifacts and primary sources shared with you, we really try to create different experiences that groups of all kinds would enjoy.
Nice, nice, nice. Well, let's move on to hear
Absolutely.
what those experiences are. And the first one that you briefly mentioned, Memories to Hand Down.
Yeah, so this is a really great program for those groups that are really looking for an interactive experience or are maybe especially interested in writing. So at the Jackson Homestead, we are so lucky that one of the Jackson residents of the house in the 1800s was Ellen Jackson, pictured here. And she's a really fabulous person, and she created her book, The Annals from the Old Homestead, which you can see here. And it's a really great example of kind of an ordinary person creating a record of their life. Because history is really defined as these kind of large events with these
Yes.
really famous people.
Exactly.
But most people are just like us. They're ordinary people going about their lives. And we try to really encourage people to think about that and then create their own records. So that, because those kind of things are so important and vital as we learn about history. And so this is an example of two people working on their own writing responses. So you can choose from a variety of different writing activities to do as part of the program. One of our favorites is called Biography of an Object. And so as we were talking about with students, we always try to use artifacts and the real thing.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we might bring out this key, which is
Yeah.
a part of our education collection, and have participants think about what is the history of that object? How may it have been used? Who was using it? And really delve into creating their own written works about it. So that's either based on their own history or some imagined history.
Oh, I love the open-ended nature of that. Could you just off the top maybe share one or two stories that come to mind that people came up with?
Yeah, so I know I have seen ones that people created about different objects, and they maybe are talking about remembering someone in their family using an object like that and how they might have used it. Another great one is maybe they have also explored the museum, and they're thinking about how might someone who have lived in this house have used this object. How maybe enslaved people that lived in this house used this object and how they related to it differently than the people who lived here that are those famous ones like the Durants who were involved in the Revolution that we know so much about, but who were those more little known people who may have used them.
And do you find maybe with feedback that participating in this program might encourage people to follow up outside of their visit and do some writing as well?
Absolutely. Actually, the woman pictured in this photograph, she actually volunteers with us now because she was so excited to learn more and become more involved, and had created, in this program, they were writing poems based on what they had seen in the museum, and she had written a large number of poems about what she had seen in response to it.
Nice, nice. Wow, just through that program, there are so many rich features. I really like one of the first things you mentioned is basing it on everyday life, and really how rich that is to learn about a time period.
Yeah, that's something we really try to focus on in all our programs and in our mission as an organization is the learning about those great people and these important events is obviously, we want to focus on that. That's the American history context. But then what are those Newton stories? What are those people in our own communities, and what can we learn from them?
Nice, nice. And as you mentioned, several of the programs do get at historical material, and none really bigger than the American Revolution, which you have some fabulous programming about, as this one will indicate, Tea and Revolution, Max.
Absolutely. So the Tea and Revolution program, like all of our programs, really focuses on authenticity, whether it's the authenticity of objects, like in our last program, or authenticity of information. And that's what really folks are looking for. And so this is more of a traditional experience, a lecture-style experience, where there is much interaction, but it's about bringing the story to life. It's the story of tea and how tea has come, how tea came to the Americas, how tea was involved, of course, in our independence, and then bringing it more locally to the Durant family, who were members of the Committee of Correspondence and represented Newton to make that big decision. Do we want to become our own nation, or do we remain under the crown? So it's really exploring that whole process. And we do use artifacts as well, like this teacup and saucer, along with the teapot as well, to help tell that story, to bring a little bit more life into two-dimensional conversation.
Well, I think even this image gets at that by the contrast. Could you set up what we're seeing here, please?
Sure. So this is an example of what that presentation might look like, whether we're at an adult assisted living center, or this is actually at our education center in the Durant-Kenrick House and Grounds.
And the contrast between maybe colonial times where it's strict, perhaps dry lecturing versus an engaging conversation with the educator or the guide presenting material, but definitely interacting either with artifacts or interesting open-ended questions.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then this is program custom made for
Yes.
the Jackson homestead.
Exactly. So similar to our school programs, our Underground Railroad program for adults is definitely our most popular at the Jackson homestead. And with the release of Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad book, it's such a wonderful opportunity for us to bring groups in who are obviously interested in these stories. They're reading the fictional work, to have them come into the museum and share what are these real stories that happened right here in our community. And they're no less exciting than learning about or reading this fictional work. And it's really wonderful to see people make those connections between what they read and then what they're hearing that happened in their own communities.
Can we explore that a little more of what people get to experience, especially if they haven't been there yet, to take advantage of both the homestead in general, but this topic in particular, what you might cover with adults?
Yeah, so we're, again, pretty flexible with what different groups need. So certain groups are more interested in more of a lecture-based format where they are hearing more of the history of the Jackson homestead, their role as abolitionists. We also like to talk about and always bring in artifacts and talk about who were these enslaved people who were freeing themselves. And one story we talk about the most is the story of Henry Brown. He freed himself from slavery by mailing himself in a box, and we have a replica of that box in our exhibits, and bring in artifacts such as this one, which is the same sort of tool Henry Brown used to make holes in the box as he traveled. And so really sharing that information, sharing artifacts.
It's an unbelievable story.
It is pretty amazing, and it's always really powerful to be able to see artifacts such as this one and see the box as well.
Now, how does your approach with adults for this topic contrast with what you might do with school groups?
They're pretty equal, I would say. With adults, you can get a little more in-depth into more complex issues and talking more about what were the economics of slavery and how did abolitionists try to distance themselves not only from slavery, but then from the economic impacts of it. So perhaps by wearing silk instead of cotton, and kind of getting into those more nuances of the situation, rather than with school groups where we take a broader view and focus maybe more on individual stories.
And you mentioned the book group. What is the ongoing series of book groups schedule or topics that come up?
So the book groups are groups that contact us, and we can either present to them sort of a lecture, or we can discuss the book with them a little bit and talk about areas of the book they maybe have questions about. Slavery, the Underground Railroad, is a difficult topic for people to talk about, and it's not one that always people have learned about in school necessarily, and we really try to create an environment in which people feel comfortable asking these questions, and so we can share information as well as those stories that they have.
Terrific, terrific. And here we get a sample of the Jackson family?
Yeah, so this is the Jackson family that were living in the homestead when it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And the seated man on the far right is William Jackson, who's the head of this family, who opened his home as a stop on the Underground Railroad and was a well-known abolitionist at the time. His wife, Mary, is seated across from him with the bonnet on,
Uh-huh.
and everyone else in the photo are his children, which people are
Wow.
always, both adults and children are always shocked by the size of the family.
Yeah, yeah. How long did it serve as an underground station?
Yeah, so that's one thing that we also can kind of get into more with adults, is that lack of information, is that these stories that we don't know. We know that the house was a stop on the Underground Railroad. We have one story of a person coming to be sheltered, written by Ellen Jackson, who we discuss in Memories to
Oh,
Hand
yeah.
Down. But other than that, we don't know. We don't know who these people were that were fleeing slavery. We don't know what happened to them. We don't know what their experiences were like in freeing themselves. And kind of sharing that with adults is very interesting, and thinking about whose story gets told.
Could you share maybe just a brief sort of development of how the house, the Jackson House homestead, turned into the museum?
Yeah, so just briefly, I know it was given to the city of Newton in the 1950s.
Okay.
And so after the Jackson family had lived there for many generations, it was eventually sold and was actually converted into offices and served as a dentist office for many years, which is always fun when we teach adults as well. Some of them remember it being a dentist office and coming
That's
there
great.
for visits. But then was converted into the Newton Historical Society, which we've then evolved to become Historic Newton and involve multiple sites now. But this story of the Jackson family, the Underground Railroad, is one that has been taught at the site for many, many years.
Do we know if there are other underground sites in Newton?
The Allen House in Newton is another one that there is an oral history that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Okay, nice.
And this area of Massachusetts was full of abolitionists and full of abolitionist activity by the 1850s.
And this image gets back to Henry Box Brown.
Yeah, Henry Box Brown. So he's one of those stories that we tell about who were those people, who are the ones that we actually do know about who freed themselves from slavery, that were either became famous or became connected with someone, in the case of Henry Brown, who wrote down his story for him, so that we can learn more about his past. So we really always try to share the stories of the Jackson family, but then also those of people freeing themselves.
And just a final question before we move on to another program. What are some of the reactions, especially this program, that adults have after experiencing it?
Yeah, well, we get a lot of really interesting ones. They range from adults who maybe never learned about this in school before and are really excited to have finally learned more about it in the national context, but then also learned that people in their own backyard were a part of this movement. The Jackson family is especially interesting because when they first arrived in the area, they actually owned enslaved people. And then within generations, they do a complete 180 and are abolitionists. And so we get a lot of really interesting feedback from people who are excited to kind of learn about this history and learn about this family that lived in their own area.
Sure, sounds like it. And moving on, Max, to yet another program that you offer.
Absolutely. So this is actually our newest program developed by one of our educators. It's called Before Pantsuits, Women Making It Work. And so this program focuses on about 350 years of history of the women who lived at the Durant-Kenrick House and Grounds. It discusses the individuals who lived around the house, whether it be Native American populations, whether it be enslaved people or servants who were in the house, as well as women who lived in 20th century and earlier as well. It's about telling their story and telling the story of their empowerment and ways in which they gained power over their own circumstances. And we tell that through a variety of primary source documents, photos, as well as testimonials from family members. For example, Frances Dewing, the wife of Arthur Dewing, the last residents of the Durant-Kenrick House and Grounds, their family is still alive and still around and still participate with the museum quite heavily. And so we hear stories from them all the time that we're able to incorporate into this beautiful narrative.
Nice, nice. And here's one of the artifacts that you use.
Absolutely. So you can see with the cross, that's Mary Kenrick Taylor, Mary Mahitable, we like to call her, and then a young photo of Francis doing as well. Yes, who is a graduate of Wellesley as well as of Radcliffe, excuse me. Mm-hmm.
And as of now, what's the range of groups who've participated and enjoyed this program?
So this is a news program. We're actually going to be offering this for the first time this March.
Oh, fabulous.
But it will be open for, just as the groups that Roz had discussed, whether we might leave our two museums and go out into the community and give this program, or offer it multiple times, depending on what groups like the League of Women Voters of Newton or other groups might actually ask for this program to be led.
What great timing for the kickoff, with March being Women's History Month.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Not a coincidence, I'm sure, in your thinking and planning. That's fabulous, fabulous. You know, that's some programs we've given a little more depth to, but what other opportunities under adult programming are available for groups?
Specifically at the Durant Kenrick House and Grounds during the May Arts Month
Yes.
here in Newton, we're working on creating a sculpture show, collaborating with Harvard Extension School. For the full month of May, we'll be having sculptures in and around the property of the Durant Kenrick House and Grounds. We're going to be interpreting them, offering some public programming, and leading tours of the house as well as of these wonderful sculptures.
Because I think that's another opportunity that you're involved with, is historic houses throughout Newton. Roz, could you share a
Yeah.
little bit about that, please?
That's another one of our adult programs that if people are interested in, they can call us to book, similar to the Memories to Hand Down, the Underground Railroad, all of the ones we've discussed, is a talk entitled Historic Houses of Newton, and kind of going all the way back to the oldest house in Newton, the Woodward House, which was built in the 17th century, coming up to the present and talking about the evolution of architecture in Newton.
Oh,
'Cause
really
Newton is-
interesting.
Yeah, we have such a wealth of beautiful homes here in such a variety of styles to really talk about how did that develop over time and how did Newton grow. And in that vein, we offer another kind of overview lecture style program about Newton history itself for people who maybe are just interested in learning more about their community and where they live.
And those programs, like the others, are opportunities to either visit or you go out to meet people in the field?
Exactly, yes. So you can either book to have your program at the museum for $6 a person, or you can combine it with a museum visit as well, or we can bring it to them to different senior living locations. We've been recently to the Scandinavian Living Center with Newton at Home. So we go to a variety of different places, and that's just $90, similar to our school programs.
And I would add additionally,
Please.
as part of our public program series, we also have in May our house tour, where individuals are actually welcomed into homes of fellow Newtonians, and they're able to tour the houses of the residents, and really focusing on some of the amazing historical aspects of the houses as well as the architecture. And that's always a very welcomed program every May.
So could you say a little bit more about that? Because I've been curious, haven't taken advantage of it. You not only visit, but there are guides there that take you around?
The homeowners themselves are able to interpret some of the history of those houses as they've researched themselves or had research done for them by Historic Newton and through our archives. So that story is told many times on that tour. Sometimes it's just in written material, sometimes it's very in-depth, but at some point they're always getting the context of that house and where it fits in the narrative of Newton.
Nice, nice. A little earlier you shared some of the reactions and feedback to the Underground Railroad program. How about the other programs? What do you hear from the range of groups that have had their nice opportunity to experience them?
Well, probably my favorite one that we get feedback about is our Norumbega program, which is a little different than our other ones that are either more lecture-based or more interactive, in that the Norumbega program is kind of both. We have a wonderful film about Norumbega and talking about its history that wraps up with looking at some artifacts and discussing. And we get wonderful feedback from people who actually remember going to Norumbega Park, whether it was...
Could you just say a little bit more about that for people maybe not familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So Norumbega was a trolley car park on the Charles River. So before cars were such a big deal in our community. Trolley cars were a way that people got around. And to kind of take advantage of the electric grid, there were parks created that people could take at the end of the line for the trolley cars. And Norumbega Park was a very large one here in Newton, had a Ferris wheel, had boating, just all of these really fabulous opportunities for families to go and spend the whole day. And so we talked to people who remember either going with their mothers when they were a kid and getting money to ride the rides, or being their first experience going and playing off by themselves while their mom relaxed in the women's hut, or going on their first date with their spouse to the Norumbega Totem Pole Ballroom and dancing in the 1950s. So it's really wonderful.
As you're saying that, I can just imagine sort of the excitement and spirit that those type of memories and visitors bring to those conversations. Sort of puts them in control, or them as the teacher per se of this opportunity, and just great memories of the past for them.
Absolutely.
And showing that those memories matter, and that those memories need to be passed down to other generations, and that though they may seem insignificant, really tell the story of our community. That park isn't there anymore. We do have photos, we do have some postcards and some other memorabilia, but other than that, it's the stories that really make them continue to live on.
And again, just underscoring what you've also mentioned earlier, the richness of everyday life.
Exactly.
And how it is meaningful. Doesn't have to be something over-the-top experience to have long-lasting value, as this program definitely demonstrates.
Absolutely.
How about thinking ahead? Do you have some ideas in mind of expanding? Because again, as I said at the very beginning, I was amazed, pleasantly pleased to see the range that you've developed that I was not aware of. And maybe just getting these off the ground is more than enough to handle now, but when you maybe have time, any ideas on the back burner?
I think we're looking at updating some of our exhibitions. So we're looking at what topics can we really discover and continue to go in depth upon as far as Newton's history, as well as I know some of our educators are looking at doing some programming on privateering during the Revolution, and how Newton was part of that amazing part of our own history. So we do have quite a few different avenues that we're going down to bring more programming to Newton.
Yeah, we're always trying to respond to what people are asking for. So we found that we have this great options of 8 different programs, but we still have people call and say, I'd love to learn more about immigration.
Oh, that's great.
And so we're starting that process of doing research about who were these groups of people that came, what were the pushes that drove them to come to the United States, and what were the pulls that made them come to Newton, and really understanding that, and hopefully grow that into programming for adults and students in the near future.
Nice. Well, as we wrap up in the last minute or two, I know in addition to the youth school programming and adult programming, there's ongoing throughout the year a range of opportunities that Historic Newton offers. Could you briefly maybe highlight a couple upcoming in the spring or summer, or just ones that people should make note of throughout the year?
Absolutely. We always have a concert as part of our general offerings, a really large community concert, as well as the Durant Kenner House and Grounds. We have maybe 2 to 4 times a year, smaller concerts for families. We have the Hay Fest at the Jackson Homestead every October, which is always a family favorite. And we also participate in many of the farmers markets and playing with toys with kids and really getting to understand a historical perspective of play and community.
Okay, and unfortunately we have to wrap up. I know there's much more you could add. I want to encourage people to not only make their way to the sites, but to visit historicnewton.org to stay updated on new developments. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Also want to thank those of you once more for joining us too, and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.